A massive shout out to the John tier member Mr. Leroy 1998 and Jenin tier Leah Rov. Your support means a lot. If you would like your name mentioned in every video, as well as receive special perks and soon having early access to new series, consider becoming a member of this channel by hitting that join button. Hi guys, this is the next part of What If Natsu Was the Son of Acnologia? I hope you enjoy. Carla always thought that Wendy's connection with certain dragon prince will only end up in trouble. He was ruthless, insensitive and above all else complete idiot. Of course, she wouldn't tell that to Wendy and definitely not Natsu. Since she returned from Tenro, she could notice that Wendy's previously close connection with Natsu was in best lacking. Then again, she couldn't really blame him since they were gone for 7 years, and not to mention that there were obviously some things they were not aware of. Be as it was, it didn't give Natsu the right to take Wendy for granted when she tried to show some worry on her part. Yes, Carla could without a doubt say that pink-haired dragon deserved that slap when they were in the infirmary. Now she sat next to Happy and Panther Lily watching Wendy slowly make her way down to the arena from Fairy Tail Team, a box right after that massacre Natsu made. The girl Shelia from Lamia Scale looked quite a bit more confident as she jumped down, but Carla had little doubt that Wendy would win. As annoying as he was at the times, Natsu did train and teach her since she was a kid. You got this, Wendy, Happy shouted, surprising Carla a bit by the sheer volume his voice had taken. She smiled fondly when Wendy blushed slightly at the encouragement her guildmates voiced in a typical fairy tale fashion. So loud that's the only thing you could hear. When Carla heard a roar she was all too familiar with, her little heart almost stopped as her eyes glazed over. The sky turned black in an instant and the beautiful arena was replaced by ruins of once great stadium. The black and white pictures that played as some sort of an old horror movie was all the small white cat needed to realize what was happening. It was another vision, and this one was predicting something horrible. Flames were licking the ground all around them, warping themselves around everything that would burn. In the middle of it all lied Wounded Dragon. The roar ripped the skies again and Carla looked up only to see Acnologia flying overhead toward a dragon that was bleeding on the ground. Acnologia, beaten and bloody himself, landed right on top of the dying dragon and sank its teeth in the flesh on the neck. The scales that protected it erupted as they cracked and the dragon let out one final cry of pain. Acnologia raised his head, and even with lack of color it was obvious that it was blood that dripped from its jaw. Dragon King looked around at the 3 dragon corpses that lied around him. The smoke was raising towards the skies as Acnologia let out a terrible howl that made Carla's skin crawl. The silence that followed was almost deafening, but it didn't last for long. 2 different bloodthirsty roars came from above and Acnologia had just enough time to look up as 2 massive dragons landed on him. One brought its claws down on Acnologia's wing and ripped off it, almost separating the limb from the body. Acnologia howled and stumbled away from the dragon he just killed, but only fell on the ground as the second dragon brought its metal spear-like tail down off Acnologia's chest. The blood erupted from Acnologia's jaw as he fell on the ground, the dust raising around him. Acnologia's eyes flashed red one last time as his massive head turned to look directly toward Carla. Dragons disappeared in golden light, leaving the silence and empty battlefield. Acnologia lied alone in the middle. In that moment Carla knew that Acnologia was no more. Carla's eyes focused at the blue face of Happy as she jumped back in surprise. Happy, she breathed out and then let out a squeak of surprise when she almost fell down. I got you, Lily said as his paw shot forward and grabbed Carla's just in time, pulling her back on the railing. What happened? Makarov asked as his eyes turned from arena toward the Exceeds. Lily shrugged but didn't say anything since Happy immediately answered, we have no idea. Carla blinked, fighting back a headache that usually accompanied her visions as she tried to remember what she saw. After a moment she looked up, eyes wide as she whispered, I saw Acnologia's death. Makarov almost fell from the railings himself as everyone seemed to forgot that Wendy was down preparing for her first fight. What? Macau asked as he inched back. You can't be serious. Carla didn't reply but simply shut her eyes and shook her head. Happy, Makarov said quietly, can you take her to Perliuzica? Happy nodded quickly as he gently took Carla's paw in his and pulled her up only for her to sit back down. I want to watch Wendy, she explained. Makarov shared a worried look with Mavis who sat beside him. The two didn't say anything but simply turned back toward Wendy, who had her eyes on the still bloodied but unwounded dragon prince who was smiling at her. Makarov smiled fondly at both when Natsu's hands flashed and his magic for a brief second spelled, You got this as Jalal watched from his own spot next to him with pleased surprise for that short moment, but the surprise was quickly hidden when Natsu looked at him, clearly daring him to say something. Wendy was quietly mortified when her name was called, but pushed the feeling deep inside her mind, trying to repress it as quickly as possible. This was no time to be afraid. She gulped. This is her first fight in the games. Until now she only watched her friends fight, but now it was her turn. Her hands curled in fists as she tried to stop them from shaking. She will make her guild proud. She will make Natsu proud. As her thoughts drifted to Natsu, so did her eyes, and they both fell on him just as his hands flashed with magic. Wendy's nervous expression disappeared in a second after she saw Natsu's message, and she smiled broadly. She could do this. She smoothed her purple dress and white knee-length baggy pants as she stepped onto the arena. Let's enjoy this, Shelia spoke, and Wendy looked at her, determination setting on her face. Wendy, uncertain her voice wouldn't waver, nodded. Are you both ready? Cabo asked after a moment. Pink-haired girl nodded happily as she hopped from foot to foot excitedly. Wendy, while not so enthusiastic, nodded as well. Then let's begin, Cabo said, and quickly made his way away from the stadium as the bell rang and two girls took fighting stance surprisingly similar. So similar that it got several people thinking. Here I come, Wendy said as the magic circle appeared beneath her. Bring it on, Shelia said with smile as she watched carefully, her eyes fixed on the circle. The small gust of wind shot from the circle as it shone, and Wendy exclaimed the enchantment, Arms Vernier. Enchant. Shelia's eyes grew wide as she jumped back, amazement present on her face. Wow. Wendy frowned as she jumped and spun around while saying, Talons of the Sky Dragon. The wind erupted from her outstretched hands and circled toward Shelia, who bent backwards to avoid the first rush of wind but quickly jumped high enough for Wendy to wonder what kind of magic the girl used. Shelia laughed out loud as her own magic circle appeared in front of her as she thrusted her hands forward, still in the air, Sky God's Boreas. Wendy, Carla called out, concerned as the black wind formed in front of Shelia's palms. Black wind, Natsu said with raised eyebrow before he smirked. Who would have thought? The black wind erupted from her palms, but Wendy didn't even flinch as she frowned, and twisted her hands so her palms were turned outwards, and she spoke even before she started spinning on the ground. Sky Dragon's heavenly spin. The wind erupted around Wendy, protecting her from the onslaught as the black wind passed around her harmlessly. Shelia stared at Wendy for a moment as she landed, and Wendy stopped spinning. You're really amazing, you know. I didn't expect you would be able to block it. Wendy allowed herself to smile as she nodded, thanking for the compliment. Thanks. She took back her stance, her smile turning into smirk. I was thought by the best there is. Shelia's forehead was marred with small frown as she took her stance as well. Shelia's frown disappeared as she smiled again. Well, since you were able to block that. The young god slayer bursted forward with surprising speed, and she found herself in front of Wendy in a matter of seconds, incantation on her lips even as she ran. Sky God's Dance. Shelia twisted her body to the side as the black wind blew around them, sending Wendy flying upwards. Wendy cried out as the wind, sharp as blades, ripped off her skin. I'm just getting started, Shelia said as she jumped after Wendy, who had her eyes screwed shut. 1, 2, 3. Wendy's eyes shot open just in time to see Shelia right at her feet. Shelia's smile disappeared and was replaced by surprise and sudden sense of dread as Wendy smiled and slowed her flight by a burst of wind from her palms. Sky Dragon's Claw. Shelia was left staring at Wendy in shock even as the blue-haired girl turned her body and brought her leg up, sending Shelia flying toward the ground with surprisingly strong kick. Shelia crashed in the ground only seconds before Wendy landed on her feet. Wendy stared at her opponent as the pink head rose to her feet, slightly disoriented from the blow to her head, but even despite that she started drawing air in her lungs, for Wendy was doing the same. Are you telling me that? Arthur turned toward his father, wide eyes waiting for an answer that came out with small chuckle. She's a god slayer, Natsu answered almost gleefully. Why are you so happy about it? Jalal asked as he raised his eyebrow at Natsu, who turned toward him. Well, you see, everybody always claims that god slayers are more powerful than dragon slayers. Wendy's about to prove them wrong. Sky gods, sky dragons, bellow. Shelia released giant tornado of black wind from her mouth, and the tornado rushed at Wendy, who not even a second later screamed, roar. Everyone had their mouth opened as the white torrent of wind, almost double the size, rushed at Shelia. The two tornadoes met and the whole stadium was engulfed in winds. In a matter of seconds watching the fight became impossible as everyone but selected few shielded their eyes from the wind and the dust it rose. Natsu watched unblinking down at the arena, one hand in front of his face to shield it from the worst. Makarov had his eyes fixed on the arena as well, and the occupants' commentators' box had their eyes fixed down thanks to the glass in front of them. If other masters saw what was going on, it would be hard to tell since they were hidden by the wind and dust. As the dust cleared, the two girls still stood in the arena. Both were breathing hard, but one obviously received the worst end from the previous collision. It seemed like the whole stadium held their breath as they waited for one of them to make a move. Natsu's lips stretched into a crooked smirk as Chalia's knee hit the ground. "I'm seriously amazed by your strength," Shelia said as she struggled to take a breath. Wendy breathed out, her hands on her knees. "You're amazing as well. I never fought someone with magic so similar to mine." "True. Me neither," Shelia said. A sudden smile stretched her lips. Wendy watched with wide eyes as the wounds on Chalia's body disappeared in the matter of seconds. "Wah, but how?" Wendy asked as she took a step back. Shelia frowned as she cracked her neck. "You can't do that." "Do what?" Wendy asked with frown. "Heal yourself," Shelia elaborated but sighed at the frown that deepened that marred her face. "I can heal others," Wendy said as she shakily took her stance. "What should I do now? I have barely any magic left." She took a deep breath to calm her thoughts, but then her eyes widened. "It's now or never, right?" Shelia noticed the slight widening of the girl's eyes and took her stance as well. "I don't have much magic left, but she is pretty much running empty." "You should give up," Shelia said suddenly, hoping the girl would listen to her, but she didn't expect for the blue head to narrow her eyes at her. "Never. If you truly don't want to give up, then I will put you to rest myself," Shelia said as she started gathering magic but stopped dead in her tracks when her growing magic power was overgrown by Wendy's in a second. The air was filled with rippling sound as Wendy gathered her magic. "What is she doing?" Makarov asked with wide eyes. "Her magic power is growing like crazy," Urza said in shock from their box. Gray nodded but didn't say anything. "I think she's trying to accomplish what Laxus did in the games," Gajil said with a frown. Lucy looked at him, seriously. "Isn't that a good thing then?" Gajil's frown deepened. "It would be if she perfected it. Only Laxus was able to learn it on our training trip. Then what will happen now?" Gray asked with frown. "We will have to wait and see," Gajil replied simply, his red eyes fixed on the Wendy. Wendy took a shaky step back as she screwed her eyes shut, trying to concentrate the natural energy she absorbed to stay under control. If she lost control of it, she will lose. Shelia gulped as she started gathering her magic as well. "Better to attack her before she finishes whatever she is doing." Wendy let out a low hiss as the skin on her fingers peeled off and the scales formed. "Just a little more." Shelia ignored the scales, but she got a pretty good idea what the girl in front of her planned. "If she's doing the same thing that Lightning Dude did, then I'm in serious trouble. Good thing she's so slow." Raising her hands toward the sky, black wind gathering in her palms, Shelia chanted, "God Slayer's secret art." "Shelia, stop it." Leon's voice carried down to the arena, but Shelia ignored it. "You'll kill her." Wendy looked up, as her eyes opened, and Shelia had to steel her resolve in order to stop herself from flinching when icy blue eyes looked at her, glowing faintly and rimmed with scales. "Dragon Slayer's secret art," Wendy chanted as she circled her hands around herself, letting the wind guide her. The tall wall of brilliant white wind circled around the girls. "They are going to crash again." Lahar breathed out in surprise. "Better get a hold on something, people," Jayama added. Heavenly gathering of clouds, the black winds around Shelia were released with almost panicked shriek as the massive torrent rushed at Wendy, who jumped into the air. "I will not fail." The dark clouds rushed beneath Wendy only inches apart, but the wind still swept her clothes and hair restlessly, and Wendy silently thanked herself for dressing pants beneath her dress. Shattering light. Sky drill. Wendy brought her hands around in a circle motion as the wide beam of pure white wind swept toward Shelia. The black winds that got in the way were diminished in seconds as the tornado struck the Lamius scale mage and ripped the ground. Waiting for dust to clear made Natsu want to rip someone's head off. He was by now practically hanging on the railings as he inched closer and closer to the edge, hoping to get a better look. Jalal looked torn between being worried about Wendy and being worried about Shelia. Arthur had his head pushed between railings, with Mira practically holding him from falling, while she herself was leaning over. The Dragon Prince was, for the lack of better word, shocked. On their training, Wendy was never able to enter the semi-dragon force, something only Laxus accomplished. Now, even behind the wall of wind that surrounded her, he was sure she managed to enter it for that brief second, just long enough to cast the spell. When dust cleared, he heard himself sigh in relief when he saw Blue head still vertical and away from the ground. His eyes landed on the small crater that contained small pink-haired wizard in the middle. The crowd was dead silent. Wendy seemed content with simply trying to get some air in her lungs. She froze, however, when Shelia began to stand up. "Oh, come on, that," Shelia said as she gave up and simply slumped to the ground, sitting down. "That was bloody awesome." Wendy stared at smiling Shelia with her mouth slightly open as the smiling girl fell back down, smile still on her face as she fell unconscious. Wendy smiled as well after a moment. That it was. The crowd roared suddenly as Wendy fell on her knees, tears streaming down her face as grin threatened to split her face. "The winner, Wendy Marvell," Chapati yelled in the microphone. His eyes flashed red and he died. Carla finished. The room in Honey Bone Inn was deadly quiet as Makarov stared at Carla when she finished. He glanced at Perliuzica, who stared at the cat with unreadable expression. Wendy sat on the bed next to the healer with fresh snowy white bandage warped around her head and poking beneath the right sleeve of her blue shirt. "Are you sure that's what you saw?" Surprisingly, Perliuzica was the first to speak. Carla, half annoyed, only nodded. Should we say something to Natsu?" Wendy asked after a moment, her eyes down as she played with the edge of her shirt. "No, I don't think we should. At least not right away," Makarov said with grim face. He didn't like the idea of keeping secrets one bit, but it was necessary. "Natsu might know something about the dragons that will come in capital, and that's exactly why we should tell," Perliuzica said fiercely, but she didn't get a chance to finish as Makarov continued in annoyingly calm voice. "Let me finish. If he knows something, that means he didn't tell us, and if we tell him Acnologia will die when he comes here, he might try to stop his father from coming." Wendy gulped. Did Natsu know that Acnologia is coming but decided to keep it to himself? What if Tenro repeats? All because he decided to stay quiet. The anger bubbled beneath her skin at the thought. He and his stupid secrets. Why would it be a bad thing if Acnologia stays away from Crocus? Carla questioned, her face fixed in a frown. Her thoughts seemed to follow Wendy's trail. Makarov frowned as he crossed his hands behind his back. Because he would still live. The grave words slowly sunk in as other three occupants froze in place after hearing uncharacteristically cold words from Makarov. Makarov scowled. "That monster almost destroyed my family and killed my children. He will not take another life as long as I can help it." The cold fury behind his words made even the ever-composed Perliuzica flinch. The streets of Crocus were empty, but that was to be expected since it was almost midnight. The fresh air was in nice contrast to the day's almost too warm temperatures. Natsu was walking with his hands stuffed deep in his pockets, Jalal next to him, his hands behind his head as he walked beside his friend. "Wanna go back to the inn?" Jalal asked after a moment. "We should get some rest before tomorrow." He deliberately avoided the word sleep, as he had had little doubt that Natsu will get any. "Nah, you go if you will." Jalal glanced at Natsu and was somewhat surprised to see the dragon prince wearing a small, barely noticeable scowl. "Is something bothering you? Do you feel the magic that's lingering around this city?" Natsu asked after a moment of silence. Jalal raised his eyebrow as he sat on the nearby empty bench and planted his chin in the palm of his hand. "Yes, I do, though I didn't thought much of it really. Is there a reason to be worried?" Natsu didn't say anything for a moment as he sat down next to Jalal and pulled his legs up, crossing them. "Unfortunately, there is." Jalal straightened his back as he eyed the back of Natsu's pink head. Is he going to say something? Jalal waited, hoping Natsu would continue, but he knew better than to push him. That usually only backfired, so he kept his mouth shut and was quite happy to see it was worth it. "I believe that someone is using Zeref's magic to meddle with time, and if my assumptions are correct, they are doing it for 7 years. Natsu's voice was somewhat distracted, and it took Jalal a second to realize the pink head wasn't looking at the ground anymore but toward the corner of one alley. "Someone's watching us. The scent seems familiar, but I can't quite put my finger on it." Natsu shook his head. Another time, Dragon Prince stood up suddenly, taking Jalal slightly by surprise as he grabbed his hand and pulled him on his feet. "Let's get going," Natsu said as he pulled his hand back and stuffed it in his pockets. Jalal nodded and started walking after Natsu, but not before taking another glance back toward the alley that seemed empty. As the two left-hooded figure poked its head from the alley to look at the two retreating mages that soon disappeared in the night. The water sphere that stood in the air was a truly an amazing sight to see. The crowd that gathered around the arena watched in anticipation as each guild chose theirs participates for the games. Chapati, with new wig again, was sitting on the edge of his chair as he spoke. The adrenaline is rising down in the arena. Your guess how will naval battle finish is as good as mine. What are your thoughts on this, Mr. Ujima? Ujima smiled as he gazed down, raising his bushy eyebrows for a moment to get a better look. This will be quite interesting to watch, I'm sure in that. That being said, go Fairy Tail. The guest of the fourth day, Rabian glanced at Ujima slightly confused before he spoke, if I may interject. My money is on Sabretooth. Ujima shot a fierce glare at the man who ignored it as he continued, they sent Lady Minerva today. Other guilds don't stand a chance. You seem awfully sure in that, Mr. Rabian. Chapati spoke up, you fail to notice that every guild sent their best to participate. Ujima shrugged, they sent their best when they saw who Fairy Tail sent. Down in the arena, Jalal smirked when he heard Ujima say that. That guy's definitely a Fairy Tail mage. Wendy looked at Jalal curiously where she stood beside him. He was a Fairy Tail mage. Jalal chuckled and nodded. Of course, he is supporting Fairy Tail then, Rocker muttered. Risley shrugged, so, I think that's nice of him. Jenny huffed, they are talking about Fairy Tail and Sabretooth like they are the only guilds left, jealous. Minerva taunted, you don't have to be. The crowd is after all just stating the obvious. Sabretooth is the best. Jenny huffed, why you? You don't have to fight over thizzes. Wendy spoke beside them, trying to calm down the blonde-haired woman. Everyone is giving their best. Risley nodded. Yay, the kid's right. She sent the small dragon slayer a grin that Wendy quickly returned with a smile of her own. This is a competition. Giving your best is a must, Shelia said with a smile. Now, folks, Chapati spoke again, the rules of naval battle are simple. The player who leaves the water sphere will lose and is not allowed to return to the game. The last person in the sphere will be the victor. When only 2 mages are left in the sphere, a special 5-minute rule will be applied. The person that leaves the water sphere during that time will be given the least points. Enter. Chapati roared, the crowd joining him. The naval battle has begun. The competitors jumped in the water sphere, not wasting another moment. I guess I will be the one to start at this time. I will show you that you should not underestimate Blue Pegasus. Jenny yelled as she rushed at Wendy, who looked at the girl in shock, but she quickly regained her bearings just in time to block Jenny's kick that was aimed at her head. I will not lose, Wendy said as she looked at the older girl, a magic circle appearing beneath her as she outstretched her hands and yelled, Sky Dragon's Heavenly Spin. Jenny's eyes widened in surprise as the sphere of air formed around the Dragon Slayer. The blonde-haired mage got barely enough time to push herself back before Wendy's defense formed. Without a doubt, the speed of the wind that formed was enough to do some serious damage. Wendy stopped spinning, her mouth already filled with air before she even completely stopped. Sky Dragon's roar, the tornado that emerged from her mouth surprised even Jalal by its size. Jenny barely managed to twist her body to avoid the worst of the attack, but the sheer force of it caught her along with Risley that was behind her. Both girls barely managed to avoid getting thrown out as the tornado erupted from the surface. Wendy does not seem to want waste any time in eliminating her competition, Chapati said, isn't she adorable? Wendy blanched for a moment when she heard that comment. She quickly regained her bearings when she saw Shelia moving at her surprisingly fast. I hope I didn't hurt you yesterday, Shelia said, genuinely concerned, with Maul smile as she launched at the girl with a kick. Wendy smiled somewhat shyly. No, Shelia twisted her body again. Another kick aimed at Wendy's head, but the young Dragon Slayer caught her leg by the ankle. Shelia quickly followed up, twisting her body again at an impossible angle, her other knee going toward Wendy's stomach, but Wendy let go of her angle and pushed herself back with a burst of her magic. Seeing Wendy occupied, Jenny turned toward Rocker, who was looking at 2 girls, maybe waiting for an opportunity to strike. No guys allowed, Jenny yelled as she kicked the Quattro puppy member out of the water, much to shock and disappointment of his teammates. Jalal chuckled behind her, that means you'll try to kick me out as well. Jenny whirled around only to come face to face with Jalal, outstretched hand, his palm facing her face, purple magical circle in front. Darkness magic. Ghost fireworks, Jalal whispered as several ghost-shaped shadows exited the circle. One warped around Jenny, who was in the middle of a surprised scream, the ghost quickly covering her mouth and binding her hands to her body as the rest of them pushed her toward the edge. "Don't forget that I'm still here," Risley yelled, her chubby frame gone as the woman moved toward Jalal, her hand cocked back ready to strike. Jalal kept his hand positioned toward Jenny, who was struggling against the iron grip of the ghosts around her while twisting the rest of his body to the side, avoiding the hit by a mere inch. Risley didn't expect him to dodge so quickly, her arm overextended. Jalal moved back to his original position that was occupied by the mermaid heel member, his knee raised to strike, meeting his surprised mark. Before the woman could be sent flying out of his reach, he grabbed her wrist and released the spell around Jenny as the woman was dragged out, brought the elbow of his until now outstretched hand in the base of Risley's neck, making the woman's vision spinning for a moment. Before the woman could even regain her bearings, Jalal steeled his grip on her wrist and spun around before letting go, sending the woman flying at the two girls that were still locked in the conflict. Wendy dodged another magic-induced fist from Shelia and quickly followed it with her own attack, raising her leg and warping it with the wind. She yelled, "Sky Dragon's Claw." The pink-haired girl raised her hands to block the kick that sent her back trough the water several meters. "Not bad," Shelia said, "but then again I know you are strong." "You proved it yesterday," Wendy smirked. "I learned from the best." Shelia gained a thoughtful expression as she looked at the Dragon Slayer for a moment. "You said something like that before. Who was your teacher?" Wendy's smirk widened as she spun around, her hands warping in the wind as she rushed at Shelia, who braced herself for the attack. "Ever heard of Natsu Soul Eater?" Shelia's eyes widened as the girl rushed at her. "Like hell, she hasn't. She saw what he did yesterday to that guild. Everyone saw it, but Wendy didn't seem as bloodthirsty as her teacher." Sky Dragon's Crushing Fang. Wendy swiped her fingers at her target that warped her own hands in black wind, blocking the most of the attack. Their fight was interrupted by one Risley Law that crashed in Shelia, almost taking the pink-haired girl out with her, but the Lamia Scale Mage barely managed to stop herself and the mermaid heel competitor. Wendy watched this with some confusion before she saw golden flesh of Meteor, Jalal soon on his opponent, that managed to get her head back together and by a mere inch evaded a kick that would have without a doubt sent her flying out. Shelia looked at Jalal and glared, obviously not happy for interrupting their fight. "Sky God's Bellow," she screamed at him, a torrent of black wind catching the blue-haired man off guard by the sheer size of it. Unfortunately for Lamia Scale Mage, the meteor allowed Jalal to escape the eye of the storm and quickly reappear behind her, his leg already raised to strike, but was stopped when Risley came at him from the side, stopping his leg with her forearm. "Never underestimate Chubby," Jalal smirked. "Wouldn't dream of it." With that said, Jalal swung his hands and moved up just as from behind him Wendy's wing attack sent Risley flying out of the sphere. Wendy looked frustrated with herself when she realized her target avoided her attack. Shelia didn't wait for Jalal to start another attack as she closed in on him, ready to strike. It seems Shelia and Wendy are double teaming on Jalal. A smart idea considering Mr. Fernandez went toe-to-toe with one of the 10 wizard saints. Chapati commented again. Wendy followed Shelia's attack, ignoring the comment. Jalal found himself dodging and ducking under a barrage of wind attacks as both girls turned towards him. Shelia moved closer to him once more, determined to get in close combat with him, something that she would realize quite soon was a big mistake as Jalal moved too quickly for her to do more than a glancing blow. Then, much to her surprise, Jalal twisted his body above hers, his hand on her shoulder, as he avoided another Wendy's large distance attack. Before he let go of her shoulder, the fairy tale mage smirked and said, "Bind Snake." From his hand sprung red snake that circled around her skin like a tattoo. The God Slayer stayed frozen in the spot, completely shocked at her inability to move even so much as her face muscle, the snake moving along her jaw and up to her forehead. Before she could even think what to do, Jalal spun around and delivered a kick to her stomach, sending her flying out of the ring with no way to stop herself. And now it's only Fairy Tail and Sabretooth. Lady Minerva has yet to make a move. From Sabretooth box, Sting was shouting, "That's Our Lady for ya." She was preserving her magic while those weaklings took each other out. Minerva smirked as she looked the two. Her superior smirk making both mages quite irritated. Wendy though felt more than a bit afraid, not that she showed it. She was left with two mages that were way stronger than she, and she definitely didn't like the sound of that. Minerva extended her hand, the palm glowing with magic. "How about we get rid of the rest of the trash?" a small bubble of magic formed beside Wendy and Jalal's eyes widened, immediately recognizing the magic. "Shit," was the only thing he could say as the bubble exploded, releasing insufferable heat that made the water around them boil while sending them flying to the side. As Wendy stopped her spinning, she looked up toward the woman, one hand sporting burn marks while the other held it. "You okay?" Jalal asked her, he himself sporting a slight burn on the right side of his face but chose to ignore it as he locked his eyes on a woman above that laughed sinisterly. "Yay," Wendy replied, fighting back a wince. "You should have just jumped out when you realized I was the one you will fight," Minerva gloated as her hand lit in the magic again, this time behind Wendy. Jalal, making his mind in a second, grabbed Wendy's wrist and flung her up, away from the bubble that exploded right in his face. The heat of it was even greater than that of the previous one, but it would be little more than an annoyance in a fight had it not been for the fact that Jalal was already at the edge of the water prison, the explosion sending him out. "And Jalal is out. You know what that means. 5 minutes rule is now active." Chapati spoke. Jalal landed harshly on the ground but didn't so much as a twitch from his own pain as he looked up. Wendy was staring at him in shock. His eyes widened in horror as he realized what he had just done. He now had no way of protecting the girl from that disgusting woman who was laughing again. "He made a big mistake leaving you here, girl," Minerva said as she looked at the blue-haired girl in front of her. Wendy stared back at her in horror that was carefully hidden. She couldn't lose now, not after everything her guild fought for. But that didn't change the fact she was weaker than the woman in front of her. "I will not give up," Wendy stated as she moved to a stance Natsu showed her once. It was different than the one she usually used and preferred, but it was also more violent, more unpredictable. One hand in front of her while the other at her side, her legs positioned opposite to her hands while her back hunched forward to increase the speed. "Don't say I didn't warn you, brat," Minerva hissed, looking angry at the determination the other girl showed. Her hands started glowing again, this time 2 bubbles appearing around Wendy, both sending her back with more than enough force to send her head spinning. Before the Dragon Slayer could fly out of the water prison, she managed to push magic into her hands and with a burst of her magic sent her small body at Minerva, an incantation on her lips but never spoken as another bubble appeared in front of her, sending her to the side. "This is brutal. Can't someone stop this?" Chapati whispered, horrified as he watched the dark-haired woman toy with the Dragon Slayer, who managed to miraculously hold herself in the sphere every time she was close to the edge. Onstan's fairy tale mages were furious, and that was an understatement. "They will pay for thizzes," Makarov hissed as he looked at Sabretooth Master, who sat among the regular crowd. The old face of Giemma twisted in a sick satisfied smirk, and for a brief moment their eyes met. "He wants thizzes," Makarov breathed in shock. "What?" Macau turned toward him in shock. "What are you talking about, Master?" "Master Giemma. He's supporting that woman to do that. He wants her to do that." Annie gasped near Makarov as she looked wide-eyed at Wendy, a red smudge spreading trough the water around her. The young girl's eyes moved toward Natsu for a brief moment, fearing what she will see. And she was right to be afraid. Natsu was standing in his box, gripping the railings to the point the stone was cracked and his fists were bleeding. Laxus stood beside him, watching the dancing magic around the dragon with worry evident on his face. Altair hugged his other arm, her eyes wide, but she refused to let go, afraid that Natsu will jump down and do something that he will regret later. Meredy stood behind them, her hands covering her mouths, her eyes wide in terror. Arthur was beside Laxus, looking ready to kill someone himself. Natsu was staring at the water sphere with such intensity it was surprising Minerva didn't catch on fire already. His magic spiked in intensity every few seconds, only his sheer willpower controlled him from letting it all out. His bloody red eyes were narrowed in barely restrained fury. He knew if he did something now he will do more damage than help. "Do you give up, girl?" Minerva questioned with a smirk as she eyed the girl that was bleeding from the gash above her right eye. "Never," Wendy breathed out, her breaths heavy. "I will not let my friends down. Not now, not ever. They fought so hard to come where we are today. They didn't stop when they thought we were dead. They continued fighting every single day. My pain is nothing compared to theirs." Her voice was strained from the pain and shouting, but she continued nevertheless. "I'm maybe not strong enough to defeat you, but I'm sure as hell not gonna let my guild down. I will fight as long as I have my 2 arms and legs. If you cut off my arms I will kick you. If you cut off my legs I'll bite you. If you cut off my head my spirit will suffocate you. So no, I will never Give up. Minerva looked at the girl, her face falling impassive as she watched the girl struggling to breathe. Such resolve. Robian spoke in shock. Why are they just standing there? Chapati questioned as he looked at the clock. Only 10 seconds until the 5-minute rule wears off. 10, 9, 8. Minerva's face slowly moved from impassive to furious. 5 minutes are up, Chapati yelled as the gong echoed around them, his voice relieved beyond belief. Now all that's left is ranking them. You think you can challenge Sabretooth? Minerva's voice was quiet, but Wendy heard it clear as day, and it sends chills down her spine. I will teach you some manners, brat, Minerva hissed as her hands lit in magic again. Wendy's eyes widened in horror as the bubble exploded in front of her, sending her toward the edge, but before she could do much else she disappeared, much to the shock of the crowd, only to reappear in front of Minerva, who drives a knee in her stomach before spinning around and kicking her in the neck, sending her spiraling away. Another explosion resonated, stopping her body from falling out. Dear gods, someone stop this, Chapati yelled. Cabo ran in the arena, panicked. Stop the fight. It's over, Minerva scoffed as she held Wendy's body out of the sphere by her hair. The moment she let her go, Natsu appeared beneath, catching her, careful not to hurt her further. Minerva slowly made her way down and looked at the dragon, who knelt on the ground and pushed Wendy's head against his chest. The silence was deafening as the crowd stared at the scene below them in shock. Wendy's team quickly making their way down while Natsu stayed up, unsure what to do. Jalal quickly made his way to the two and looked at the Wendy, his eyes wide with horror and guilt. I am so sorry. I shouldn't have let this happen. It's not your fault, Natsu whispered as he removed a stray strand of hair from Wendy's forehead, minding the gash above her eye. Could you hold her for a moment? Natsu asked as he carefully scooped her up in Jalal's hands, who nodded dumbly, put out by the sudden question. Don't cry, Natsu, Minerva's voice carried to them. She alive? Sabretooth, Urza and Grey hissed simultaneously as their magic spiked up, the two with the rest of their teammates beside them, the 5 standing in front of Natsu and Jalal. You've made enemies of the worst possible guild to piss off, Urza growled furiously. You will pay for thizzes. Gajiel cracked his knuckles, his hands turning silver, the armor spreading over them. An orb raised over Ultir's hand as she moved toward Minerva, only for Sting and Rogue to stand in front of her. Our Lady doesn't need you stinking the air around her, Sting replied. Why you? Grey moved forward ready to beat the guy to next week, but Rufus grabbed his arm, a sickening smile on his lips. Now. We don't want any trouble. You should have thought about that before your lady bitch went too far, Mira spat with vigor. Orga cracked his knuckles. What did you just say? You heard me, you idiot. You shouldn't be fighting. Cabo started but quickly moved back when both teams turned toward him. Shut up. What about you, Soul Eater? Cat ate your tongue, Minerva taunted as she watched Natsu looking their exchange behind the 5 teammates. Come on, Natsu, kill them. I know you want to, so just do it, the voice echoed Trough, his mind much to his annoyance. Shut up, Natsu hissed at him mentally. I promised myself long time ago I wouldn't kill in front of Wendy if I could help it, but you can't, it continued, you can't stop yourself. She'll understand, she won't. No one would, no matter how much I want to kill these imbeciles. I killed yesterday but only because I knew she wouldn't see the actual act. If they can't accept you for who you are, then you don't need them. Natsu found himself inwardly horrified. He actually started nodding his head for a moment before he stopped. What was he doing? What have you done to me? There was no response. His thoughts stayed undisturbed as the voice fell quiet. Natsu shook his head to clear his thoughts and blinked out of existence, only reappeared in front of them. Tima watching their guildmates slightly guarded. Minerva made a big mistake. Mark my words, you will suffer. The cold promise sent shivers down her spine, but Minerva merely smiled at him. Oh, I would love to see you try, yay. You don't stand a chance against Our Lady, Sting spoke up. You might have been more powerful than we were 5 years ago on that mission, but you don't stand a chance now. Rogue nodded. We are more powerful than we used to be. More powerful than you are? You seem awfully sure in that, Gajiel barked. With a reason, Sting replied with a smug grin. After all, we are now the 3rd generation of Dragon Slayers. Natsu's eyes narrowed. 3rd generation? What are you talking about? Sting laughed. I thought you knew everything. The blonde sneered at the pink-haired man before he mocked, using his own words. Mark my words. You will lose. Kill him. The scream was so loud Natsu barely stopped himself from wincing, his eyes gaining a maddened glint that greatly alarmed his guildmates. Shut up, damn it. Please, ladies, gentlemen, if you start fighting here I will have to disqualify you. Cabo. Sting sent the pumpkin man a look that sent chills down the smaller man's spine, but after a moment scoffed, "My lady, we should get going. I'm getting sick from the smell anyway." Minerva smirked as she glanced at Natsu, her teammates following her without another word. As the two teams departed, Cabo quickly made his way from the stadium. It was slightly surprising when he emerged in Fairy Tail box and called out, Master Makarov, if you have a moment." Makarov frowned in confusion but nodded nonetheless. "Yes, of course. Is there a problem?" "Actually yes, but don't worry," Cabo spoke, "it is easily fixed. You see." The silence was broken by Chapati, who spoke up, somewhat reluctantly, We will now move to the other part of the day. The battle part is about to begin. And for today's treat, we have tag battles." The crowd seemed reluctant to cheer at first. Everyone still had their minds on the brutal display a few minutes ago. After a moment of silence, Chapati continued, "Right. The matchups for today have been announced." "Oh, dear, someone really has a bad sense of humor," the wig-wearing man muttered before a lacrima lit up in the sky, showing the battles for the day. Blue Pegasus vs. Quattro Puppy Lamia Scale vs. Mermaid Heel Sabertooth vs. Fairy Tail. Fairy Tail? What about the other team? How is there only one? One of the spectators wondered, and he wasn't the only one. As more similar comments rose, 5 blank lacrimas screens appeared in the sky. As you probably noticed, Fairy Tail lacks a team. Due to the problem that arose yesterday regarding Raven Tail and their rule breaking, the organizers asked Fairy Tail to merge their teams because the odd number of teams left was quite inconvenient. The pictures you see on the screen are the pictures of the new Fairy Tail team. The crowd watched as the 5 lacrimas lit on the screen. 5 Fairy Tail mages appearing on them. "This is Ultimate Fairy Tail Team," Mavis said with a small smirk. "It is." Makarov nodded. Natsu looked at his own face that moved as he looked at the lacrima. Next to him proudly stood Mira, Urza, Laxus and Jalal. Far above the ocean that surrounded Fiori, a floating island with a name as such was hidden by the clouds from anyone brave enough to venture this far north to the sea from the mainland. A dark shadow, much smaller than the massive island yet easily the size of Magnolia's cathedral, shot like a bullet trough the sky before landing on the green grass of the island, in front of the massive structure, built before the humans even existed, the Palace of Dova. The snowy white dragon that landed looked around. He turned his head that looked like that of a snake with massive long horns curved backward as it looked around with its long neck, and a loud rumble in the shape of a sigh escaped its parted lips. It folded the massive feathery wings and flicked the tail with a tuft of a fur at the end of it. A brown dragon, the color of wet sand, rose from one of the massive towers that rose from the palace and dived down, landing beside the newcomer. The dragon, much less elegant in build than the white, looked at it curiously. "Back already, King Himmel." The sky dragon King Himmel looked at the bulky dragon next to him. The dragon was almost a head taller than Himmel and almost just as wider. His wings were shorter, looking like rocks glued together. His lower jaw was pushed forward, 2 long fangs jutting out of the parted lips instead of horns that usually decorated the head of most dragons. "I was gone for almost a week. How long am I supposed to be gone?" Himmel asked as he moved forward, past the bulky dragon, who snorted. "You should show more respect to your superiors, Prince Gansaki. I'm sure you don't want High King hearing you talk like that to me." Stone Dragon Prince Gansaki grimaced. "Of course. My apologies, I was out of line, but I did not mean to offend." Himmel nodded. "I am well aware of that. Is there something you needed from me?" "Not in particular," Gansaki muttered. The two passed Trough, the huge garden that looked more like a small forest which decorated the entrance of the White Palace. The tall trees cast shadows on the two as they walked in silence, the sound of birds chippering above and the rustling of leaves as other dragons moving around further away the only thing breaking it. The silence around the two was broken quickly as the shadows on the trees moved. Small green-scaled dragons, not even the size of Gansaki's palm, moved Trough the grass hurriedly as a forest green dragon, thin as a pine tree it walked by, moved to them. The dragon's wings were rather unusual for a dragon, resembling more the wings of a dragonfly. 2 horns rose from its head, facing backward, looking like they were made out of wood with even few leaves growing on it. Green moss-like fur warped around the base of its neck and on the tip of its tail. "Queen Emerald," Himmel nodded in greeting. The Queen of Earth Dragons, much smaller than the two just as most of her race, smiled, the neat, needle-like teeth glinting. "You have returned unusually quickly, King Himmel. Himmel rolled his eyes as Gansaki snickered. Told ya. Emerald looked at Gansaki, who immediately quieted down. I hope everything is alright, Emerald continued as the group of three entered the great entrance hall of the palace, the golden gates opening before them on their own, the magic taking care of it. The huge entrance hall with circular walls that were lined up with just as large balconies, supported by dragon-shaped massive marble pillars, several hundred meters high and with the glass ceiling, was filled with dragons of all shapes and sizes, flying around in impossible order and harmony. I apologize, but I will have to leave the pleasure of your company. I have to go to see my father, Gansaki said as he moved away as Himmel and Emerald responded respectively. Spread your wings, and fly far. As Gansaki disappeared in one of the balconies on the upper level, Emerald spread her dragonfly-like wings and fluttered with them, producing a sound similar to that of a cricket. She looked almost confused as Himmel continued walking on the marble floors, toward the next golden gates on the other end of the room. You are not going to your quarters? No, Himmel replied. I have some news High King might want to hear. Is that the reason you returned so soon from your hunting trip? Himmel nodded. Then I hope you are bearing good news. High King seemed to be in foul mood earlier today when I saw him. Himmel grimaced as he shook his head with a sigh. I hope the importance of the news will be more important to the High King than the meaning behind them. Emerald nodded as she rose to the sky and moved to the upper balconies. Then I hope the wind behind you is strong. Your roots should run deeper for your kind words. Emerald disappeared from his sight, the tuft of green fur on the end of her tail the last he saw of her. Himmel locked his blue eyes at the golden gates in front of himself, easily twice as tall as he was. With a sigh, the Sky Dragon King moved forward, the gates opening just as silently as those at the entrance, nothing but magic running the power behind them. The room before the White Dragon wasn't as high as the entrance hall but was possible just as large in width and length. The elegant, millenniums-old table of white onyx stretched long and wide in the center of the room. Along the walls lined with stained glass windows were golden pillars, and above the table hung a huge golden chandelier lined with thousands of candles and diamonds. At the far end of the table, facing the doors, sat Acnology in all his glory, looking at the sky trough, the window closest to him. The frown on his face made Himmel pause for a second, thinking about turning around. Before he could contemplate on it for longer, Acnology spoke. Greetings, King Himmel. What novelties are you carrying? Himmel pursed his lips for a second as he glanced at the golden gates closing behind him. He had to say he was wondering how Acnology always knew what was happening on the island. I was flying over the seas for about 2 days, heading for the mountains in the north, Acnology nodded, well aware of the usual route the king before him took when he left the island, when I came over most unusual sight. The island that disappeared from the waters 7 years ago, the one you sunk, was yet again there, unscratched, looking just as it did when I saw it the last time. Acnology blinked. He would have questioned the statement the dragon made, but the utterly rude gesture was not necessary. Himmel would not come to him if he was not certain. After a moment, as the information sank in, a sudden realization dawned on Acnology. So that's why the idiot of my son didn't come to the meeting, Acnology muttered as he looked back at the sky. Himmel blinked. He had never truly seen Acnology's son outside of the few meetings, but the dragons that knew him seemed to respect the Dragon Prince, so he saved any prejudice he might feel for the once human to himself. What else have you found out? Surely you have not here to inform me of just that. You sounded far more urgent. Ah, yes. When I saw the island I moved closer to the lands. You did what? Acnology growled as Himmel grimaced. I thought I was clear when I said, stay away from mainland. You were, Himmel said hurriedly, but I wanted to find what was going on. I apologize, my king, the curiosity got the better of me, Acnology sighed as he stood up and moved toward Himmel, who swallowed uneasily. What else did you find out? Be careful, if it's not of importance the disrespect you showed will be greatly punished. Himmel nodded as he lowered his head. Acnology is towering above him, the cold white eyes of Dragon King staring down at him. The Sky Dragon King swallowed again. Emerald was not exaggerating when she said the High King was in a foul mood. Himmel was never a great fan of Acnology's way of the ruling, but he couldn't argue with his logic and the fact that he managed to hold the dragon kind together over the past 400 years when humans gained the upper hand in the war. But still, no use in arguing, he will just make matter worse. Acnology would not excuse his own son, and Himmel had little doubt the human boy wouldn't bear consequences for his absence. As Acnology loved to say, rules without exceptions last eternally. If it was required he would die himself, and that was a reason why the other dragons along with Himmel followed him so easily and faithfully. While among the mortals, I discovered something quite unsettling. I am waiting, Acnologia warned as Himmel stayed silent for a long moment. The next word that left Himmel's was enough to send Acnologia into a complete state of shock: Ragnarok. They were talking about Ragnarok. The gong resonated around the stadium signaling the start of the final battle of the fourth day. Sting hunched forward on the balls of his feet, Rogue closely behind him as both started running at two fairy tale mages, splitting after only 2 steps, and in perfect synchronization getting to a sliding stop, the two fairy tale mages still not moving as both dragon slayers took a deep breath. White dragons roar, shadow dragons roar. The two beams of energy rushed at their opponents but never meeting their mark when Natsu grabbed Laxus' arm by its wrist. The silent agreement between the two already formed as Natsu, in a show of inhuman strength, sent Laxus in the air, above the destructive force that ripped the ground before them, Natsu sinking in the chaotic void as the spell wordlessly cast opened a hole beneath him. Laxus, still in the air when 2 attacks met and rose a layer of dust that covered entire arena, took a deep breath, but instead of releasing a roar as many thought he would, he shouted at the top of his lungs, "Dragon Slayer secret art, raging heavens." The sky itself ripped as a thunder in the shape of a dragon crashed into the earth, the dust raising even more if it was possible, as the dragon exploded upon meeting the ground, a large ball of condensed energy tearing troughed the arena's floor again, leaving nothing in its wake. Laxus landed soundlessly in the cloud of dust, a hand covering his nose and mouth as a lesson Natsu beat into him. Air. Thought him on their short training trip came to his mind: don't let dust into your nose or mouth. A sense of smell to a dragon is more important than their eyes. Laxus looked around Trough squinted eyes, and for a second a black spark glowed in the dark, but as soon as Laxus tried to focus on it, disappeared. It's too quiet. No sooner than he finished that thought, a familiar voice of their resident dragon rang to his ears as a smirk stretched his lips. Chaos Dragon's wing attack. The attack came from above, where the dragon probably reappeared after exiting the void that connected the two holes in their reality. It became apparent to Laxus soon enough the attack wasn't aimed at Sting or Rogue but at the arena in general, as the wind the shockwave of the attack carried scattered the dust. The sight that was left of the once great arena was quite amusing in Laxus' humble opinion. The crater in the center of the arena was easily 3 meters deep and easily 3 times as wide. A soft thud beside him signaled the landing of the dragon, who dusted his clothing. Laxus looked around, searching for his opponents, but so far he didn't saw them. Did he go overboard? Did he demolish them completely? Don't drop your guard down yet, Sparky boy, Natsu muttered as his eyes turned toward the lone shadow without its owner. Laxus gave the dragon an incredulous look. Sparky boy? Really? Natsu shrugged as the two watched Rogue emerges from the shadow, Sting clutching to his partner's arm, looking positively green. You're moving like that all the time, Sting hissed at him. That's just not normal, man. Natsu's eyes narrowed slightly, but more in wonder than anything else. Shadow walking. Laxus looked at him. Isn't that what Arthur can do? Natsu nodded. Yes, but this is a lot more advanced version. He is capable of pulling someone else in the shadows with him. Be careful about that, it might prove dangerous, to Laxus at least, the voice cackled. Natsu rolled his eyes but didn't reply. Rogue looked at the two fairy tale mages standing on the edge of the crater the lightning dragon slayer made as Sting slowly returned to his normal color. Let's kick their asses, Rogue. That attack won't catch us by surprise again. Rogue glanced at the blonde before nodding. That attack maybe won't, but I don't dare to even think what the two of them are capable of on their own. This will be a fight worth fighting. Sting looked at his partner. The years of working together made the words unnecessary as the two moved forward. This time, instead of splitting apart, Rogue sunk into the ground and moved underneath Sting, merging with the shadow of the boy. Sting leapt forward. The sudden burst of speed didn't go unnoticed by his opponents as Laxus' body warped in lightning before he moved away. Natsu didn't move away but planted his feet in the ground and raised his forearm, ready to block the attack. Seeing the Dragon Prince ready to block the attack, Sting smirked. Right where I want you, White Dragon's crushing fang. Sting yelled as he jumped in the air to push more strength in the attack. What caught Natsu's eyes was the shadow that, instead covered in white light, crashed in Natsu's forearm, and the dragon's eyes actually widened slightly at the sudden strength that was definitely not there before. Everyone who knew the Dragon Prince was surprised when he was actually pushed back. Natsu lashed out with the arm that blocked the strike suddenly, pushing the White Dragon Slayer back. The Dragon Slayer had little time to think what to do as Natsu closed in from in front of him, Laxus moving from the side. Chaos Dragon's Iron Fist. Natsu yelled as he made a running start and moved down on him. Sting's eyes widened as he moved to the side, at the angle that should be impossible just as Laxus crashed next to him, ground cracking on the impact but Sting unharmed. The white dragon dropped to the ground from where he stood and rolled away. Interesting, Natsu commented after a moment of silence. Color me impressed. Laxus looked at the Dragon Prince in shock. What are you talking about? Shadow possession, Natsu said as he gestured towards Sting just as Rogue emerged from his shadow. By controlling Sting's shadow, Rogue made it possible for them to move the way they did. It's quite rare ability, and quite difficult to use. It's good to see a Dragon Slayer learning magic that isn't their own. Laxus looked at Natsu again, now openly staring. Was that a compliment? Though they are not synchronized nearly enough to stay connected for long amount of time it would seem, Laxus glanced at Rogue who panted slightly while Sting glared at the pinkhead. What are you trying to say? That we're not good enough. Sting, stop letting him get to your head, Rogue warned as his breathing calmed down. He's mocking us again, Sting yelled as he pointed at Natsu who merely cocked his head to the side. It might be because of the blonde. Sting bristled as he rushed at the pinkhead again, the shout already on his lips. You won't mock Sabretooth. White Drive. Rogue sighed but moved to stand next to his partner, Shadow Drive. Ragnarok. To hell with good manners and rude gestures. Himmel didn't seem to care at the moment himself and simply nodded. I talked to the spirits. They feel it as well. It is coming. Fast. Acnologia sighed as he looked around. We will have a meeting tomorrow at noon. The Dragon King flexed his wings as he moved, walking towards the doors in haste. The golden doors opened noticeably faster than they did to Himmel as if feeling the change in the mood of the passer. You're going somewhere, now, Himmel breathed out in shock. Acnologia turned to him with small glare forming in his white eyes and Himmel immediately added carefully, my king. Acnologia nodded in approval before he glanced at the right side of the table on the far end he sat a few minutes ago. One seat is empty too long. Himmel's eyes widened as Acnologia moved out of the meeting hall. Spread the word. I don't want excuses. Every king and queen must be at the meeting, of course. You can count on me, Your Excellency. Himmel quickly said as he bowed his head, watching as Acnologia spread his wings even before exiting the entrance hall, the dragons around quickly moving out of the way when they noticed their king. The black smoke rose from Rogue while the white light shined from Sting. Drive incantation, Laxus asked in surprise. He knew what those were. Natsu gave a briefing on their training trip. The two must have practiced it for years to be able to enter it so quickly. Now that's interesting. Sting and Rogue shot forward like two bullets, yet again faster. Laxus narrowed his eyes as he gathered the lightning in his fist before crashing it down into the ground, Lightning Dragon's thunder barrier. The wall of lightning shot in the air as Natsu rushed at it. Sting and Rogue, faster from the spell, changed their directions, splitting up again as each took their own side. Natsu stopped in front of the wall trough which thousands of volts coursed and made a twist of his body jumping over it just as the wall came down. Rogue and Sting looked at Laxus, surprised only for a second Natsu was not with them, but as soon as they heard the incantation they turned around. Chaos Dragon's wing attack. Twin dragons scattered to the side but couldn't move away too far before Laxus slammed his fist into the ground again, a smirk on his lips as the wall of lightning circled around the two. The only way out was on the side the crossed crescent blades of chaos energy raised the ground. Without time to think, both took a stance ready to redirect or at least slow the attack down. White Shadow Dragon's rough silk. This is it, folks. The famous coordination of the twin dragons of Sabretooth. The two trusted their hands forward, the thin, concentrated beams of light and shadow emerging from their joined middle and index finger before merging together, doubling in size as they did so. The beam of white and black magic met the attack and barely managed to slow it down before the two rolled out of the way, but not unscratched as the chaos energy exploded, covering the arena in smoke once again. Natsu started falling down to the ground before he hit the ground. A hole opened beneath him and the dragon passed trough in a second, reappearing beside Laxus, who let the lightning wall fell. The arena stayed silent for a moment while the stadium roared. The dust cleared, revealing Sting and Rogue slowly rising to their feet. A blackened mark covered Sting's left arm, the gash not deep but still bleeding. Sting stumbled slightly before standing straight, glaring at the two dragon slayers who didn't look even winded. The right side of his torso missing the coat and the part of his shirt. Sting growled as Natsu looked with a blank face at him. I hate him, Sting muttered. I know, Rogue replied calmly. The idea was good but you are too predictable, Natsu said after a moment. Rogue should have passed beneath the wall and if he did so he would have seen me. Laxus glanced at Natsu almost groaning in exasperation. You're tutoring them, just pointing out their mistakes, Natsu corrected. Laxus snorted. Yay, right, he heard that tone more than enough times during the past few weeks when they were training with the dragon. Why, I thought you said you'll kill them, Natsu's smirk stretched into a small wicked grin. Oh, I will. I'll tear them apart. Sting grounded his teeth. Stop mocking us. You think it will be so easy to defeat us? Sting launched forward before Rogue could stop him. Idiot. The hot head of the twin dragons took a deep breath. The spell he will cast clear even before he spoke the first words. White dragons. Rogue cursed. Shadow dragons. Laxus smirked. Lightning dragons. Natsu grinned. Chaos dragons. Holy shit, Chapati whispered as the air became heavy with magic building up. The clash of 4 attacks as strong as this. Hold your seats, ladies and gentlemen. The few clouds in the sky turned black as they started gathering above the stadium. The 4 mages bellowed the final word in union. Roar. Sting and Rogue released it first. Rogue's shadow beam twisted around Sting's white one, giving the white roar lack outline and making it double in size. Laxus and Natsu's roars released second later. It was clear who was the dragon in the group as Natsu's roar alone almost matched the size of the twins' combined one. Lightning roar didn't warp around Natsu's like Rogue's did around Sting's. It crashed in it, merging with the black and blue energy. The red and yellow sparks of magic that thundered around the black chaos energy made the roar look more like a storm cloud than a magic attack, the red and yellow merging into one as the red lightning cracked around black. The attack turned into a force of nature, met the roar half the size of its own, swallowing it in a second. The combined attacks crashed, swelling in size to an orb the size of the arena, hiding the participants from the view of the spectators who shielded their eyes from the wind that threatened to blow them away. The forest surrounded the mountains for miles in every direction, tall trees far below him as he swung his wings down and up. Acnologia sighed as he moved toward the rapidly approaching mountains, wings flapping furiously as he tidled upwards, rising towards the clouds. The Dragon King paused only a second when he passed the clouds, looking at the other side of the mountain range. The landscape abruptly changed from deep forest to burning wastelands. I should have taken Himmel or some other sky dragon with me. I'll have a hard time finding him if he doesn't choose to show up on his own. Acnologia folded his wings for a second, letting himself in a free fall towards the foot of the northern side of the mountains before he spread his wings again, flying slightly upwards further into the wasteland. Far to the north, the only distinguishable feature of the wasteland rose almost as high as the highest peaks of the mountains he just passed. The cracked ground beneath his flying form was rapidly replaced by molten white-hot lava. The smoke rising from the throat of the volcano covered most of the sky, but the moonlight above and the lava above gave the area interesting glow. You better answer me, you big idiot. The news I carry are more important than the meaningless grudge. Acnologia took a breath in order to calm his mind before he roared to the sky. The silence lingered just long enough for Acnologia to start thinking he came here without a reason. If he doesn't want to be found, then I came here for nothing. No sooner than the Dragon King finished that thought, another roar shook the sky. The shadow flew above the black dragon before coming to an abrupt stop behind him, the torrent of flames spewing from the open jaws of the red-scaled newcomer. Acnologia folded his wings again, dropping under the flame tornado, but the offending dragon titled his head down as well, the inferno following the king, who spread his wings again and barely managed to avoid the attack that died down after few more seconds. What are you doing here? I thought I made myself quite clear what I think of you when you killed Atlas Flame, you bastard. They destroyed the arena, Chapati breathed out as he stared at the hole where the arena used to be. The air smelled of ozone as the black cloud circled in the sky, blocking the sun and light with it, and Crocus was covered in the darkness, looking more like the midnight than noon. Red lightning cracked around trough the sky. Lacrimas tried to concentrate on the bottom of the newly created pit where nothing moved. The darkness of the sky made it almost impossible to see what was going on. Just as the rocks on one side shifted, the clouds split again, and as the red lightning hit the ground and Lacrimas shut down, leaving the audience in the dark, both figuratively and literally. The rocks shifted as a hand shot out before the rest of the body scrambled out. Rogue coughed as he bent down again and pulled Sting from the pile of rocks. The shadow user stumbled backward but caught himself again as he took a handful of the remains of his coat and ripped it off, revealing the blackened, burned right hand and damaged shirt, the skin beneath as damaged as the hand. Sting grimaced in pain, the left side of his face completely burned, even the tips of the blonde hair blackened by the attack they caught themselves in the middle. He looked at his left hand, the glove gone along with most of the skin. Crap, Sting muttered as he looked at his partner who didn't look any better than he did. Rogue stayed silent as the two looked around, trying to find their opponents in the pitch black surrounding, but the darkness did little to handicap them, their eyes seeing in the night almost as good as in the day. As Sting continued to survive the surrounding, Rogue looked up. They made at least 100 meters fall to get to the bottom of whatever this was. It looked like old part of the castle, forgotten by time or purposely hidden. The other thing the Shadow Dragon Slayer noticed was that the walls surrounded them completely, and without the wings, he did not have, there was no way out. Sting. Rogue spoke, but his eyes caught the sight of the black hole opening in the wall on the opposite side, near the arched doors that seemed to lead even deeper, railway leading in it and a cart resting on it. The two were slightly surprised when the large blonde-haired mage stumbled out before falling face first on the ground. "Never pull me in that shithole again," Laxus muttered as he pushed himself up, looking slightly green in the face. Natsu stepped out behind the lightning mage, the void closing. The dragon dusted his clothing and looked at the downed lightning mage with unimpressed face. "Sure, I'll let you get blown away like those two were." Laxus managed to push himself up, only to stumble again, tripping over his own legs, the blinding headache making him unable to stop his fall in the cart. Laxus cursed again as he tried to pull himself up, grabbing the first thing that came in his hand that turned out to be the brake of the cart. Pulling it up, the cart's wheels squeaked loudly before turning, rolling back. Nausea caused by passing trough the void only intensified when the cart started moving, and Laxus' eyes rolled back as he slumped back in, rolling out of the view of the three remaining fighters. Rogue blinked, the only sign he was shocked Natsu didn't so much as twitched while his partner rolled away. Sting openly stared, jaw falling slightly open but closed with audible clank when Natsu turned his red eyes toward them. Sting clenched his right hand that was mostly undamaged by the last attack as he glared at Natsu, anger flaring up yet again at the indifferent look Natsu sent them. "Again with those eyes, you still think you're better than us?" Sting yelled at the dragon, who merely cocked his head to the sides. "I bet that was the best you could do," Sting continued, ignoring Rogue's warning glances. "But listen closely, Soul Eater. You didn't see the best of me." Natsu stared at them for a moment, still silent, before a slightly wicked smile stretched his lips. "You think you saw my best? Then allow me to show you my worst." Rogue resisted the urge to smack his partner as the magic around Natsu started pulsing again, warping around him like a blanket before it shot up in a pillar of black and red energy. The Dragon King moved out of the way of yet another fire tornado that rushed at him with speed almost impossible to believe. "Stop it, you fool," Acnologia bellowed at the red-scaled dragon, who glared at him angrily. "Did you stop when your son begged you to leave Atlas Flame alive? Did you stop when I begged you to spear him? Did you, Acnologia?" Acnologia glared as the fire dragon started sucking the air in his lungs again, before sighing, "Atlas Flame is still alive, idiot." The dragon stopped abruptly. "What?" Acnologia rolled his eyes. "Never the one for Manurs. I said Atlas Flame is, I heard you." The dragon snapped back, irritated and angry beyond belief. "Seriously, who does he think he is? But I would like to know, why should I believe you? You didn't say that when I left, because you left before I came back. You wouldn't." The fire dragon growled at him. "You killed my best friend to teach your kid a lesson. A lesson you should never teach a kid." "I didn't kill him." "Then where is he?" "That I would not know. When he found out you left, he left as well in order to find you. Though he did make it pretty clear what he thinks of me." Acnologia muttered the last part. "Why are you here?" the red dragon asked instead. Acnologia hesitated before he spoke. "I'm here because I need your help." His eyebrow twitched in irritation when he saw Dragon's lips twitch up slightly before a chuckle that turned into full-out laughter rumbled from his throat. "Oh, now this is rich. A great high king of dragons is asking for my help. What can my humble self do for you, my king?" His voice dripped with sarcasm as he mockingly bowed his head before laughing again. Acnologia scowled. "If it was anyone else." "Shut up," Acnologia snapped, but sounding more embarrassed than angry. "I'm serious here." The red-scaled dragon stopped laughing at the face his once friend made. He was serious, frighteningly so. "What is it? Speak fast, because if you came here to bother me because of some idiotic reason I will cut you down where you stand. In any other situation, Acnologia would have made some snide remark, but the lack of it spoke volumes to the red dragon. Ragnarok will start soon. The tall but not too large pillar pierced the clouds that covered the sun, revealing it once again to crowd's relief. Seconds later lacrimas lit up again, circling around the pit before focusing on the three wizards. What on earth happened here? Chapati muttered as he looked at the twin dragons, looking much worse than they did the last time the crowd laid their eyes on them. Where's Laxus? Makarov asked, confused as he looked at the slowly reducing pillar of chaos energy. I'm more interested what is father doing. This doesn't look like he's transforming into a dragon. No, he isn't, Gray muttered, knowing even before the lacrimas showed it what he will see. You never saw him do this? Lucy asked, slightly surprised. Arthur glanced at Annie and the two shook their heads. No, we saw his dragon form only once in the last 5 years, Annie said, surprising the rest even more. Arthur shrugged. It's not like he really needs to use them all the time. The moment the pillar shot from Natsu's body, the sound of ripping flesh and breaking bones followed it, making the two dragon slayers cringe in disgust. Their faces quickly morphed into expressions of pure shock and horror, mirrored by everyone else in the stadium except specific few. Natsu grinned deviously, the canines longer by almost an inch glinting in the light that now shined down to the bottom of the pit. Shocked. The two-layered voice made the two step back. Natsu flexed the long wings that set comfortable weight on his back to get them rid of some stiffness, the long tail slithering across the ground like a snake as the dragon hunched forward on the balls of his feet. Closing his eyes for a second, relishing in the feeling this form brought. Unrestricted, so free, so alive. The times in the last 7 years he could feel the heart thumping in his chest was countable on one hand. Sting clenched his hands again, glaring at the ground. Such power. But I don't care. I am stronger. I promised Lecter the next time I see Soul Eater I will defeat him. I will prove to everyone that I am stronger than he is. Just watch me, Lecter. Ragnarok. Acnologia snorted in annoyance. Yes. Would you stop repeating after me like a damn parrot? No need to be rude, the dragon muttered. I'm rude. Who's repeating now? I. Stop screwing around, idiot. This is serious. The dragon sighed. I know. What I don't understand is, what do you need me for? The kings and queens stopped following you. Acnologia glared at the dragon. No. You are simply the only one able to help me. I'm not following you. The confusion was clear in his voice. Humans will be involved. The dragon stared at him for a moment before realization dawned on his face. Ah, of course, humans. Will you come with me? When do I have to decide? It was a question he already knew the answer for. Now, let's play. Natsu extended his hand towards them, gesturing them to come at him. Sting grounded his teeth before he spoke. You know, that thing we mentioned. That were third-generation dragon slayers. Rogue looked at Sting, who glanced at him. The silent understatement passed between the two as Sting continued, not waiting for Natsu to answer. There is a certain perk to fusing a natural dragon slayer with Lacrima that creates the second generation. Natsu's ears twitched as the magic around the two started rising again. Oh my, now this just might get interesting. The seconds passed as the two gathered magic around them. What is this? Jalal muttered as he looked at the two, their magic pressure still rising. It almost feels like that thing Laxus and Wendy did. Urza looked at Mira. No, it's not like the semi-perfect dragon force Natsu learned them. The power difference is too big, Mira said with a frown. Wait, are you saying? The shocked redhead spoke. This is the real thing. Natsu's eyes widened just a bit as the magic exploded around the two. Sting smirked as white scales formed on his arms and the side of his face. The burned left side looked almost healed when the scales covered it, but unfortunately for the dragon slayer, it was not the case. I will keep my promise, Lecter. Rogue's face stubbornly impassive, the scales spreading over his arms and framing his eyes as he closed his eyes for a second. This is for you, Frosh. The slight surprise quickly passed as Natsu's lips stretched into a small, barely visible smile. Amazing. The word was said so quietly it wasn't heard even by the two dragon slayers several meters away. You keep surprising me, Natsu spoke, but I don't have to use even this form to defeat you. Sting scowled as he looked at Natsu. You keep mocking us. You will regret it. I will make you pay for even daring to mock Sabretooth. A slight frown crossed Natsu's face before the devious smirk appeared again. I would like to see you try. as the minutes ticked by the High King of Dragons got more and more impatient. He opened his maw, ready to say something, but the dragon finally answered. Fine. Acnologia actually let the relief show on his face as he released it in a sigh. Thank you, Sting sneered as he hissed to Rogue, let's do this. Rogue looked at him for only a second before nodding. The Dragon Prince was starting to get on his nerves as well. Unison raid, the two chanted together as they moved their hands behind them, the orbs of white light and black shadow forming in open palms, growing in size. Another combined attack. Natsu cocked his head to the side. The orbs, larger than their casters by now, merged and the two thrusted their hands forward and released horizontal pillar that rivaled the combined roars of Laxus and Natsu. Holy Shadow Dragon's Flash Fang. The gray light surrounded the dragon in demon form and in seconds pierced the wall behind, shooting off the ground and above Crocus. Natsu. Urza screamed as the attack swallowed him. Is this the end of Fairy Tail's Dragon Slayer? Chapati whispered with wide eyes. Did Sabretooth took another Dragon Slayer from them? Don't be ridiculous, Yujima said, much to the surprise of the crowd. This is not nearly over. Are we watching different fights? Rabian asked after a moment. Makarov stayed silent as different exclaims of disbelief and shock echoed around him. He's not defeated, Mavis stated quietly as she looked at the Lacrima more in wonder than anything else. Makarov nodded. The two are powerful, but they lost the moment Natsu entered the arena. The attack died down and the aftermath was seen immediately. Sting and Rogue panted as they looked at the hole in the 10 meters thick wall that their attack made. The dust covered the bottom of the pit once again. It's done, Rogue said as his eyes scanned the dust. Sting smirked. He never stood a chance. I would beg to disagree. The two stood frozen in the spot looking as the dust settled, the demon in front of them stood largely unharmed, the extended palm facing them the only thing that seemed to be damaged at all as the smoke rose from it. From Lacrima's, the spectators got a clear view of the destruction that seemed to avoid the demon as he was standing on the only spot not scared a foot deep. What are you? Rogue spoke beside him, bringing him out of his thoughts, and the blonde looked at the creature in front of him. If I got a penny every time someone asked me that, Natsu muttered before he looked at Rogue, the face blank once again. I'm the final form of a dragon slayer. I am a dragon. Twin dragons looked at Natsu with wide eyes. Final form? I do not remember ever hearing about that, Rufus spoke quietly. Because no one ever said it before, Minerva said as she eyed the picture of the demon who lowered the extended hand down. I can't believe that he is hiding such strength. If what he said is true, then Sabretooth might lose this year. Her eyes narrowed. No. That can't be true. If it was Sting and Rogue would have already achieved such power. And even if he is a dragon, it shouldn't make that big of a difference, Minerva said finally, her voice more confident than she really felt. Sting's eyes narrowed suddenly as he glared at the dragon in demon form. Bullshit. He yelled at him as he pointed a finger at him. I don't believe you, you asshole. Even if you are a dragon, why would I care? I killed one before. Who says I can't do it again? Unlike you. Natsu tensed suddenly as he stared at Sting, his eyes widening in shock, but Sting didn't stop even when Rogue grabbed his elbow, begging him without words to stop. What did he just say? Mira stared at Sting with wide eyes, horrified. Urza shook her head in disbelief. He couldn't be talking about his fight with Acnologia. I believe he is. Jalal whispered, his eyes fixed on Natsu's face. Does that boy has a death wish? Makarov hissed. That is not a fight you should bring up when talking to him. Not in that way, Arthur said, disgusted. Not in any way, Annie said, Trough clenched teeth. That guy is awful. Do you know why I hate you and your petty guild so much? Sting growled. I hate you because you're such a prick with a stick so far up his ass it's a surprise it's not poking out of your mouth. Natsu's eyes widened even more at the words, the echoing laughter of the voice almost deafening. You feel too high above us to call yourself a dragon slayer, so you call yourself a dragon. Well then, Mr. Dragon, you just make a bigger fool of yourself because you lost to your father. I killed mine. The burning anger that was there ever since the fight between Wendy and Minerva turned into a white-hot inferno that burned its way off his body as Natsu's jaw closed with a snap. Dragons are supposed to be protectors, right? You failed. Miserably. Sting stopped himself, biting his tongue as Natsu's eyes turned red completely, glowing with power before for the magic exploded out of the Dragon Prince to such intensity it brought the Dragon Slayers on their knees. I went too far. Sting looked at Rogue whose eyes were locked on him, filled with anger. That was the stupidest thing you ever did, Rogue muttered as he gasped for breath and cringed as he heard bones breaking one after another, the sound coming from the dragon in front of them. Makarov's eyes widened in alarm as he turned to Chapati, who was watching the growing from of Natsu from the box. Stop the fight. Seeing no one heard him, the small man jumped off of the railing and moved toward the doors that lead out of the box, running toward commentators. Stop the fight. Those boys are going to die. The stadium watched in absolute terror as a large black paw came crashing into the ground next to the dragon slayers, who jumped back as the magical pressure concentrated in the body and stopped pushing them down, the pillar disappearing with it. Sting shook under the red eyes that looked down at him with such hatred it felt like he would get lit on fire any second. The dragon moved around the suddenly too small pit as he crashed into the walls before growing tired of it and spreading his wings and rising into the air. You call yourself a true dragon slayer? His voice wasn't double-layered as it was in his demon form, but it still sounded greatly distorted from the one his guildmates were used to. I will rip you to shreds until there is nothing left of you. I will tear your very soul apart. Natsu cocked his head back as the back of his throat started glowing in black and red energy. If he fires that here, Mavis spoke as she jumped to her feet. He's going to destroy half of the Crocus, Biska said as she looked at the dragon form for the first time. Mavis looked around surprised the crowd around them didn't run away in fear already. The fools. They had no idea in how large danger they were. They thought this was a show. I can't believe this, Arthur said as he stared at his father in pure awe, the look mirrored by Annie, who looked at her brother and nodded before turning back toward her father as her green eyes shined with awe and astonishment. They weren't afraid. Why would they be? Father would never hurt them. Chapati stared at the dragon gathering magic in shock that grew even more when Fairy Tail Master rushed in the room, pushing past the guards and taking the microphone from Yajima's hands. Natsu, stop this lunacy this instant. Oh gods, how he hoped Natsu wouldn't turn his mouth their way in his anger. The dragon prince paused for a second as the energy in his mouth dimmed for a brief moment before he started charging it again. Sting, say something, Rogue hissed at him. There was no way they would stop that attack. What? Sting yelled back at him. Don't you think I said enough? You said too much. Fix this. Rogue yelled at him, leaving Sting in shock as he stared at his partner. It was weird, hearing the usually quiet shadow user scream with such panic in his voice. Natsu, Sting yelled after a moment. Wait. The dragon closed his mouth. Wait, okay, let's humor him. He flapped his wings again as he rose in the air higher and circled around the stadium, his piercing red eyes fixed on two dragon slayers standing beneath him. Why should I wait? Natsu sneered as he moved downwards, landing on commentator's box much to Chapati's dismay. Turning off the microphone, Chapati turned to Makarov, who was shaking like leaf. The wig-wearing man was left wondering for a moment if it was fear from the dragon above or relief that the dragon didn't fire that roar. Should we be worried? Chapati asked as he looked at Makarov. The small man took a deep breath as the roof above their heads squeaked under the weight. I am not sure. Usually, I would say no, but now. They said things not even we dared to tamper with, Makarov whispered as he shook his head. How long before the time is out? It was Yajima who answered. 5 minutes. Down in the pit, Sting shook his head. If you fire that roar, you won't kill just us. You will kill everyone else on this stadium. Natsu scoffed. Do you really think I have such little control over my power? Rogue blinked before he looked at the dragon, who slowly started climbing over the wall down toward them. Makarov and the rest of the commentators in the box got a clear view of Natsu's underbelly as he moved over the glass that cracked as the dragon slowly and with surprising grace moved down. Like a snake, he circled around the two dragon slayers. If you plan to kill us, we will not go down without a fight. Sting yelled as he followed the dragon circling around them. I wouldn't expect anything less, the Acnologia lookalike said as he lashed out with his tail, so fast it caught to two dragon slayers completely of the guard as it flung the downright trough the hole their attack created a few moments ago. With a scream of surprise, Sting and Rogue found themselves flying toward the ground. It was an even bigger shock when Natsu shot out from the hole and spread his wings, catching the two with his front legs before twisting in the air and flying upwards above the stadium. We have little less than 2 minutes to finish this, Natsu said as he warped his taloned fingers around Rogue, who gasped in pain as the dragon squeezed him. Sting, held in the other hand, opened his mouth, the light gathering as he fired the roar with a scream of anger right at Dragon's head. Natsu moved his head to the side as the roar passed him. Do you surrender? If not, your partner will die. You failed to protect him. How would that feel? Do you have an idea? Sting gulped as he looked at Rogue, who let out a scream as Natsu pressed harder. Stop it, you monster. Wrong answer, Natsu said as he narrowed his eyes, the back of his throat gaining well-known glow as the dragon tilted his head toward the shadow user. No, please. I surrender. I give up. Stop it. Stop. I'm begging you. Sting screamed in panic as blood erupted from Rogue's mouth. Chapati, hearing this, trough the lacrima that displayed the whole conversation, quickly took a hold of the microphone, and it's done. The battle is finished. Fairy Tail's Natsu Soul Eater is the winner. Makarov released a sigh of relief as the dragon started descending to the ground, landing in the pit once again. The Dragon Prince released his hold on the White Dragon Slayer first, and Sting stumbled to the ground before falling on the rocks, unable to stand straight. Rogue's unconscious form was released a moment later when the dragon landed, and the second he did that, Sting scrambled to his partner and gently shook his shoulders. The tears welling in his eyes. I lost. I broke my promise. I'm pathetic. The only broken bones in his body are few ribs. The mismatched voice of Natsu came from behind him, and the blonde turned his head so quickly it gave a crack. The dragon was gone, and Sting wondered for a brief moment how he missed the transformation as the pinkhead walked to them. I made sure to not break anything important, just press the right spots, Natsu continued. Why didn't you kill me? Sting asked after a moment. You said you would. You still could. The voice supplied. It wouldn't be hard now, just turn their neck. ... Or maybe something more dramatic like rip their hearts out. That would make a nice show. Shut up. I swear to whatever god is there, I will wring your neck and not theirs. I did, Natsu allowed. I'm still thinking about the possibility. Sting tensed as he moved in front of Rogue. Don't worry. As I said, just thinking. It was a much better lesson to show you that you should not bring some things up to an opponent who is stronger than you. The White Dragon Slayer looked at his partner and gripped the edges of his ripped pants. You weren't mocking us, were you? You were trying to teach us. ... Why? Natsu smirked. It took you long enough. Our kind should stick together. There are not many of us left. Sting blinked. That was not something he expected. You mean dragons or dragon slayers? You were a dragon, but you were a dragon slayer once. Dragons? No, there are plenty of them left. I mean dragon slayers. The dragon looked up at the circular edge of the pit, grateful the conversation from down here didn't carry outside anymore when the lacrimas turned off once the battle was finished. Plenty? Sting asked as he looked at Natsu wide-eyed. You know where they are? At the moment, not precisely. The silence lingered for a moment. I heard your guild kicked out that Yukino girl a few days ago, Natsu said as he looked at the two. Will they kick you out for losing? Sting shook his head. I don't know. I doubt it though. ... We are one of their best fighters. Though it probably doesn't seem as much to you, it does. You two would probably be S-class mages in Fairy Tail with that dragon force. Remarkable that you are able to enter it on your own free will, by the way. Thank you. If you don't have a guild to come, find Magnolia. I'll beat some sense into you and that arrogance out if you try to be an insufferable brat again. It's almost noon, Himmel said as he entered the full meeting hall and flown over the table, landing on the left side of Acknowledgia's seat that was still empty. The 20 or so kings and queens around the room nodded, knowing that already. The Water Dragon Queen voiced her concerns. Will High King even show up? He usually isn't late. The light blue scales on the dragon glinted in the light coming from the windows as she looked at Himmel. The Dragon Queen had the head shaped similar to Cobra, and two horns protruded from her forehead and circled back, looking a lot like ice spikes. The folded wings on her back were made of 4 ice-looking bones, each with thin water-like substance stretching between. Her body long and elegant. The sun is not above us. He is not late yet. Gansaki's father, the huge stone dragon king, spoke. The Dragon King looked similar to his son in many ways but was even bigger than he was. The gruff-looking head had a horn on the nose along with fangs protruding from lower lips. Adalstian has a point there, Kindra, Emerald said happily as she moved with grace fitting a queen. Her unusually small body for a dragon but perfectly usual for her race let her move to her seat without even unfolding her wings. The Water Queen sighed as she pursed her lips, her dark blue, almost black eyes moving across the room. The atmosphere was tense, thanks to the sudden meeting called only a few weeks after the usual yearly meeting. Do you have any idea what this is about, Cephas? Kindra asked the Shadow Dragon King next to her. The black dragon looked at her with his green eyes. turning his lizard-like head that lacked any other distinctive features such as horns or ears. The Shadow Dragon King was slightly taller than her but had similar lean build, obviously favoring speed over strength. The dragon fixed his black, bat-like wings, the sign of impatience that seemed to be becoming quite popular in the room. "No, I would like to have, though," Sefta said as he looked at the white Sky Dragon King who moved in his seat nervously. Before another question could be asked, the doors of the hall opened and the hall fell into shocked silence as the two dragons entered. Acnologia flew to his seat quietly, landing with grace as the red-scaled dragon moved behind him, landing to his right. Emerald was the first to say something as her quiet whisper broke the silence. "Igneel. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't, so you never miss another awesome video."